They'd built a perfect machine. Small towns where travelers disappear into cells. Judges who never met a black man they couldn't convict. Officers who plant evidence as routinely as they write tickets. A system so elegant, so profitable that it ran unchecked for 20 years. But machines have a weakness. They can't tell the difference between prey and predator. So when they arrested Ethan Carter on a quiet road in Mill Creek, they thought they had their next victim. Instead, they found their executioner. Because Ethan had something none of their other targets possessed. A brother who could tear their machine apart from the highest office in American justice. Sometimes corruption doesn't need a hero. Sometimes it just needs the wrong man in handcuffs just before we get back to it. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Ethan Carter drummed his fingers against the steering wheel of his Mercedes S-Class, replaying the successful pitch meeting in his mind. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty highway as he navigated through unfamiliar territory. His GPS had suggested the shortcut to the small town of Mill Creek, promising to shave 30 minutes off his journey home. The sleek black vehicle purred smoothly along the winding road, its polished surface reflecting the golden hour light. Ethan adjusted his Italian silk tie, a power move that had served him well during the presentation. At 42, he'd mastered the art of commanding attention in boardrooms, but something about this unknown town made him uneasy. The Welcome to Mill Creek sign appeared ahead, its paint peeling at the edges. Population 15,000, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and outsiders stood out like ink stains on white paper. Ethan checked his fuel gauge, quarter tank, enough to make it home, but cutting it closer than he liked. A small gas station materialized on his right, its weathered sign advertising prices that seemed stuck in the previous decade. He signaled and pulled in, parking beside one of the 4 available pumps. The moment he stepped out of his car, he felt the shift in atmosphere. 2 elderly men on wooden chairs outside the station's convenience store stopped their conversation mid-sentence. A woman loading groceries into her SUV quickly finished and hurried to leave. Ethan maintained his composure, straightening his custom-tailored suit jacket as they read to leave. Ethan maintained his composure, straightening his custom-tailored suit jacket as he walked to the pump. Inside the store, the clerk's eyes followed his every movement as he approached the counter. Pump 4, Ethan said, pulling out his platinum card. The clerk, a thin man with a patchy beard, took the card with visible reluctance. You passing through? The question carried an edge that suggested it wasn't just friendly small talk. Yes, sir. Just need to fuel up, and I'll be on my way. Ethan kept his tone professional and courteous, the same way he handled difficult clients. The clerk swiped his card and handed it back without meeting his eyes. Pumps ready. Back outside. Ethan felt the weight of unseen stares as he filled his tank. The gas pump clicked rhythmically, each sound echoing in the tense silence. He noticed a police cruiser parked across the street, its occupants watching with too much interest. As he replaced the nozzle, his phone buzzed. A text from his brother Malcolm. How'd the meeting go? Knocked it out of the park, Ethan typed back. Taking a shortcut home. This town gives me strange vibes, though. Malcolm's response was immediate. Stay safe, little brother. Call if you need anything. If only he knew how prophetic those words would prove to be. Ethan pulled out of the gas station, hyper-aware of the police cruiser that smoothly entered traffic. Behind him, he maintained exactly the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. The cruiser followed at a consistent distance, like a shark trailing its prey. The town's main street stretched before him, lined with brick buildings that had seen better days. Faded awnings hung over empty storefronts, and the few pedestrians on the sidewalk seemed to deliberately avoid looking at his car. The whole scene felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. After 5 minutes of this tension, red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Ethan's heart rate increased, but his exterior remained calm as he signaled and pulled over to the shoulder. He'd been through this before. The key was to stay composed and professional. Two officers emerged from the cruiser. The taller one approached his window while his partner hung back, hand resting casually on his holster. Ethan kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. License and registration, the officer demanded without preamble. His nameplate read Barnes. May I ask why I'm being pulled over, Officer Barnes? Ethan's voice remained steady as he reached slowly for his wallet. Your right tail lights out. Barnes's tone carried a hint of satisfaction. That's impossible, Ethan replied. I had the car serviced last week. Handed over his license and registration, noting how Barnes's partner, Officer Hayes, had moved to inspect the back of the vehicle. Step out of the car, sir. Barnes's hand shifted to rest on his belt. Officer, I checked all my lights this morning. They were working perfectly. I said step out of the car. The command came harder this time, brooking no argument. Ethan complied, moving with deliberate slowness. The gravel crunched under his Italian leather shoes as he stood. I'd like to see this broken taillight for myself. Hands against the vehicle, feet back. Barnes's voice had shed any pretense of professionalism. You seem awful concerned about that taillight. Maybe that's because you're trying to hide something else. Ethan felt rough hands pat him down as Officer Hayes approached with a familiar small bag in his gloved hand. Look what I found in the trunk, partner. That's not mine, Ethan stated firmly, his mind racing. I demand to see your body camera footage of this search. You didn't have probable cause or my consent to open my trunk. Barnes's laugh was cold. Guys like you always think you're above the law. Always got some fancy words about probable cause and rights. Well, guess what? The drugs were in plain sight when you opened your trunk at the gas station. That's probable cause right there. That's a lie, and you know it. Ethan kept his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. I never opened my trunk at the gas station. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut punctuated his words. You have the right to remain silent. Hayes began reciting as he roughly guided Ethan toward the cruiser. You're making a serious mistake, Ethan warned as they pushed his head down to enter the back seat. Through the window, he could see passing cars slowing down to watch the scene unfold. Some drivers shook their heads, while others seemed to smile with grim satisfaction. Inside the cruiser, the police scanner crackled with static before a voice came through. Looks like we got another one. Hayes and Barnes exchanged knowing looks in the rearview mirror as they pulled away from the shoulder. Ethan sat in rigid silence, his mind already formulating strategies. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or more importantly, who his brother was. The drive to the police station was short but tense. Ethan observed every detail, noting street names and landmarks. The station itself was a squat brick building with windows tinted so dark they looked black. A few other patrol cars were parked outside, their presence making the building seem more fortress than public service facility. As they led him inside, Ethan caught his reflection in the glass doors. His expensive suit now wrinkled, his carefully maintained appearance disturbed by the rough handling. But his eyes showed no fear, only calculating determination. These small-town officers thought they had caught an easy target. They were about to learn just Ethan showed no fear, only calculating determination. These small-town officers thought they had caught an easy target. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The booking area smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. A desk sergeant looked up from his computer, his expression shifting from boredom to interest as he took in Ethan's appearance. Well, the sergeant drawled. What do we have here? Found this one trying to move product through our town, Barnes announced, pushing Ethan forward. Fancy car, fancy suit, probably thought he was too smart to get caught. I want my phone call, Ethan stated firmly, and I want to file a formal complaint about these officers planting evidence in my vehicle. The sergeant's eyebrows rose. Planting evidence? That's a serious accusation, boy. Better watch that mouth of yours. It could get you in even more trouble. The booking process was deliberately slow, each step drawn out with unnecessary questions and paperwork. They took his fingerprints, photographed him from multiple angles, and conducted a more thorough search. Throughout it all, Ethan remained silent, memorizing faces and names, noting every procedural violation. Finally, they led him to a holding cell. The metal door clanged shut with an ominous finality. Through the bars, Ethan could see Barnes and Hayes talking in low voices with the sergeant, occasionally glancing in his direction with smug satisfaction. A police scanner mounted high on the wall crackled again. Sheriff Briggs wants an update on the situation. The voice was different this time, more authoritative. Tell him we got it handled. The sergeant responded. Subject is secured. DA Vaughn has been notified. Ethan leaned back against the cold concrete wall, his mind working through the implications. This wasn't just a random case of racial profiling. It was too organized, too rehearsed. The planted drugs, the coordinated response, the immediate involvement of the DA. This was a system, not an incident. He closed his eyes, thinking of his brother Malcolm. The U.S. Attorney General would be very interested in what was happening in this small town. But first, Ethan needed to survive long enough to make that call. The cell was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made time feel suspended. Through the small window high in the wall, Ethan could see the sky darkening. Rush hour traffic would be building up on the highway by now. He should have been halfway home. Instead, he was here, caught in what was clearly a practice scheme. He thought about the woman at the gas station who had hurried away, the old men who had stopped talking. How many others had they watched being set up like this? How many lives had been ruined by this corrupt system? Footsteps approached his cell. Officer Barnes appeared, twirling a key ring around his finger. Comfortable in there, big shot? Hope, you're not too used to those fancy hotel rooms you probably stay in. Ethan met his gaze steadily. You know, Officer Barnes, there's still time to do the right thing. Whatever scheme you're running here, it's going to fall apart eventually. All schemes do. Barnes is going to fall apart eventually. All schemes do. Barnes's smirk faltered slightly. You think you're real smart, don't you? Think you can talk your way out of this? We've got you dead to rights. Drugs in your trunk. Resisting arrest. Resisting arrest? Ethan's laugh was sharp. Your body camera footage will show otherwise. Oh, wait, let me guess. There was a malfunction with the recording. Keep running that mouth, Barnes growled. D.A. Vaughn will be here soon. Maybe. He'll be interested in hearing all your theories about schemes and setups. As if on cue, the station's front door opened and new voices joined the mix. Ethan could hear the shuffle of expensive shoes on linoleum, the murmur of important conversations, being held just out of earshot. Through it all, he maintained his composure, waiting for his moment. They would have to give him his phone call eventually, and when they did, everything would change. These small-town corrupt officials had no idea what was coming their way. The station grew quieter as night shift personnel replaced the day crew. Ethan watched the changing of the guard, noting how certain officers avoided eye contact, while others seemed to take pleasure in the situation. Each detail was another piece of evidence to be used later. Finally, after what felt like hours, he heard the words he'd been waiting for. All right, hotshot, time for your phone call. The fluorescent lights of Mill Creek Police Station cast harsh shadows as Ethan was led back to his cell. His single phone call still denied. Officer Barnes's earlier smugness had evolved into something darker, more calculated. The night shift was settling in, bringing with it an atmosphere thick with anticipation. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, accompanied by the jingle of keys and a deep voice that carried authority. Sheriff Walter Briggs appeared, his brass badge gleaming under the artificial light. He was a tall man with graying temples and cold eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. Mr. Carter, Briggs drawled, drawing out each syllable as he approached the cell. Causing quite a stir in our quiet little town, aren't you? His smile never reached his eyes as he studied Ethan through the bars. "I'd like to make my phone call now," Ethan stated firmly. "It's my right," Briggs chuckled, the sound devoid of warmth. "Rights? You know what's interesting about rights, Mr. Carter? They're like rules in a game. Sometimes the players decide to make up their own." He leaned closer to the bars. "Your type doesn't get special privileges here." The casual racism in his tone made Ethan's jaw tighten, but he maintained his composed exterior. "My type? You mean successful businessmen who know their rights under the law. Getting smart with me won't help your situation." Briggs straightened up, adjusting his gun belt. "We found drugs in your vehicle. That's a serious offense in Mill Creek. We take our war on drugs very seriously here. Those drugs a serious offense in Mill Creek. We take our war on drugs very seriously here. Those drugs were planted." Ethan replied evenly, "And we both know it." Briggs's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation against my officers. Very serious indeed. Maybe we should add attempting to intimidate law enforcement to your charges." The station's front door opened and new footsteps approached, these more measured, accompanied by the soft rustle of an expensive suit. District Attorney Richard Vaughn appeared, his presence filling the narrow corridor. He was younger than Briggs, with carefully styled hair and a sharp suit that spoke of ambition rather than service. "Well, what do we have here?" Vaughn's voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who spent his days convincing juries of whatever truth he chose to present. "Another drug runner thinking he can use our roads as his personal highway." "Mr. Vaughn," Ethan acknowledged, noting how the DA's arrival had shifted the power dynamic in the room. "I assume you're here to investigate the illegal search and seizure of my vehicle along with the planting of evidence by your officers." Vaughn's laugh was practiced theatrical illegal search, according to the report. "I just reviewed those drugs were in plain sight, and given your attitude, I'm not surprised you're trying to blame our fine officers for your own poor choices." Through the window of a nearby office, Ethan caught glimpses of shadows moving behind the one-way glass. More observers watching the show, probably other officials involved in whatever scheme was unfolding. "Look at the bright side," Vaughn continued, pulling up a chair and sitting with calculated casualness. "If you cooperate, maybe we can work something out. A guilty plea? Some community service?" He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Otherwise, with your prior record, you're looking at 15 years minimum." "Prior record?" Ethan's voice carried genuine surprise. "I don't have a prior record." "No." Vaughn made a show of checking a file he brought with him. "That's interesting, because I'm looking at quite a rap sheet here. Multiple arrests for drug possession across 3 states. Seems like you've been a busy man, Mr. Carter." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't just planting physical evidence. They were fabricating entire criminal histories. This was far more sophisticated than simple racial profiling. The cell next to his. A man stirred in the shadows. Ethan hadn't noticed him before. The man's face was bruised, his business clothes wrinkled and dirty. Their eyes met briefly, and the man whispered, "They framed me too, 3 days ago. Don't trust any of them. Quiet in there, Bishop." Briggs barked, shooting a warning glare at the other cell. Vaughn stood straightening his tie. "I'll give you some time to think about your options, Mr. Carter. But don't take too long. My offer won't stay on the table forever." As Vaughn and Briggs walked away, their voices carried back down the corridor. "Think he'll break?" "They all do." Eventually, left alone again, Ethan processed what he'd learned. The fabricated criminal record, the coordinated pressure, the other prisoner with a similar story. This wasn't just corruption. It was an organized operation. Hours passed. The station's activity continued around him. Officers coming and going. Paperwork being filed. PH phones ringing in distant offices. Through it all, Ethan observed and listened, building a mental map of the station's operations. A young officer, barely out of the academy by the look of him, approached with a cup of water. His nameplate read, Officer Lucas. Unlike the others, his expression held a hint of uncertainty. "Here," Lucas said quietly, passing the cup through the bars. "You should drink something." "Thank you," Ethan replied, studying the young man's face. "How long have you been on the force?" "Officer Lucas." Lucas glanced nervously over his shoulder. 3 months. "And how many arrests like mine have you seen in those 3 months?" The young officer's discomfort was visible. "I'm not supposed to talk to the prisoners, because you might start questioning things," Ethan pressed gently. "Start wondering why so many out-of-town businessmen suddenly turn into drug dealers when they pass through Mill Creek." I said, "I can't talk about it," Peters repeated, but his voice wavered. He turned quickly and walked away. His footsteps hurried. Through the high window, Ethan could see the sky beginning to lighten. He'd been here all night, denied his phone call, denied basic rights, but each hour had given him more insight into the corruption surrounding him. The station grew busier as morning shift personnel arrived. Ethan caught fragments of conversations, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "Another arrest means we'll hit our quota for the month. The feds can't argue with our numbers now. Briggs says this one's perfect, successful enough to have cash, no local connections." A door opened and officers Barnes and Hayes entered, looking fresh and ready for another day of corruption. They were accompanied by 2 detectives Ethan hadn't seen before, their badges marking them as part of the drug task force. "Ready to make this easy on yourself?" Barnes asked, pulling out a typed confession. "Sign this, and maybe you'll see daylight again before you're too old to enjoy it." Ethan didn't even glance at the paper. "I want my phone call." "Still playing that game?" Hayes sneered. "Maybe another few hours in here will change your mind." The detectives exchanged glances. The taller one spoke up. "We could expedite his processing if he cooperates. The DA's office is pushing for quick resolutions on these cases." "Quick resolutions?" Ethan repeated. "You mean railroad innocent people into guilty pleas to pad your statistics?" "Innocent?" Barnes laughed. "We found drugs in your car. Multiple witnesses saw you acting suspiciously at the gas station. And with your record, my manufactured record," Ethan corrected, "created sometime between my arrest and D.A. Vaughn's arrival." A flicker of unease crossed one detective's face. He pulled Barnes aside, their whispered conversation just barely audible. "Are you sure about this one? He seems different." Barnes waved off the concern. "They all think they're special at first. He'll break." The morning wore on. More officers paraded past his cell, each trying different tactics. Good cop, bad cop, threats, promises, a well-rehearsed performance that had probably broken many others before him. Through it all, Ethan maintained his composure, watching and listening. He noticed how certain officers deferred to others, how information flowed through specific channels, how the hierarchy of corruption operated. Around noon, D.A. Vaughn returned, this time with a court-appointed defender in tow. The lawyer was a nervous man named Frank Wilson, whose rumpled suit and defeated expression suggested he was either part of the scheme or had long ago given up fighting it. "Mr. Carter Wilson," began, his voice lacking any real conviction, "I've reviewed your case, and given the evidence against you, I strongly recommend accepting the DA's plea deal." "Evidence?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You mean the planted drugs and fabricated criminal record? Have you even looked at the arrest report? Checked for body camera footage? Verified the chain of custody for the alleged evidence?" Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "The officer's testimony will be interesting to hear under oath," Ethan finished, "especially when they have to explain why their body cameras weren't functioning, why they searched my vehicle without consent or probable cause, and why their arrest report contradicts basic facts that any decent investigation would reveal." Vaughn stepped forward, his patience visibly wearing thin. "You're only making this harder on yourself, Mr. Carter. The offer expires at the end of the day. After that, we proceed with the full weight of charges." "Then I suggest you proceed," Ethan replied calmly. "And I suggest you prepare for what comes next." Something in his tone made Vaughn pause. The DA studied him more carefully now, perhaps seeing something in Ethan's composure that others had missed. Check his phone records. Vaughn ordered a nearby officer. I want to know who he's been in contact with. The next hour brought increased activity around the station. Officers huddled, in small groups speaking in low voices. Papers were shuffled, files reviewed, phone calls made in hushed tones. In his cell, Ethan waited patiently. They would have to give him his phone call eventually. Department policy required it, and despite their corruption, they still needed to maintain the appearance of proper procedure. Finally, Officer Lucas approached again, this time with Sheriff Briggs beside him. "Your phone call," Briggs announced, his tone suggesting he was granting a great favor. "Make it count." As Ethan was led to the phone, he caught snippets of conversation from the dispatch desk. "They're pushing to exceed last month's numbers. The mayor wants an update on the seizure totals. Make sure those property forfeitures are processed correctly." Each word confirmed what he'd suspected. This wasn't just about racial profiling or corrupt officers. This was a systematic operation designed to generate arrests, seizures, and forfeitures, a machine that turned passing travelers into statistics and profit. Standing at the phone, Ethan took a deep breath. They had no idea what they'd started when they pulled over his car, no idea who they were really dealing with. His fingers moved over the keypad, dialing a number he knew by heart. His brother's number, the number that would change everything. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a familiar voice answered, Malcolm Carter speaking. Behind him, Ethan heard the shuffle of feet as officers moved closer, trying to hear the conversation. He smiled slightly, knowing that their entire corrupt world was about to be shaken to its core. "Malcolm," he said clearly, watching Briggs' face from the corner of his eye, "I need your help. I'm being held at Mill Creek Police Station on falsified charges. And brother, you're not going to believe what I've uncovered here." The phone receiver felt warm against Ethan's ear as his brother's voice filled the line with quiet authority. Behind him, Sheriff Briggs and the other officers leaned in, their earlier smugness giving way to curiosity. "Tell me everything," Malcolm Carter commanded, his tone carrying the weight of his office without broadcasting it. "I was driving through Mill Creek when Officers Barnes and Hayes pulled me over," Ethan began, watching Briggs' face. "They planted drugs in my car, denied me my phone call for hours, and fabricated a criminal record." Malcolm's breath caught, slightly. "Are you hurt?" "No, but there's another man here, Bishop, who wasn't so lucky." Ethan kept his voice steady. "They've been running this operation for a while, brother, targeting specific travelers, falsifying evidence, pushing plea deals." A pause filled the line as Malcolm processed this information. When he spoke again, his voice carried deadly precision. "Put the sheriff on." Briggs stepped forward, smirking as he took the phone. "This is Sheriff Walter Briggs, and who might you be?" "This is United States Attorney General Malcolm Carter." The words fell like hammer blows in the quiet room. "And you're holding my brother illegally." The color drained from Briggs' face. Officer Barnes, who had been lounging against the wall, straightened up so quickly he nearly lost his balance. The room's atmosphere shifted from predatory to panicked in an instant. "Sir, there must be some mistake," Briggs stammered. "We found narcotics in his vehicle during a routine traffic stop." "Did you now?" Malcolm's voice could have frozen hell. "Tell me, Sheriff, are your officer's body cameras working today? I'll be very interested in reviewing that footage, along with your department's arrest records for the past 5 years. Briggs' hand trembled slightly as he held the phone. "Sir, I assure you we followed all proper procedures." "Save it for the federal investigation," Malcolm cut him off. "I'm mobilizing resources as we speak. In the meantime, my brother better receive proper treatment. If he so much as gets a paper cut, I'll add personal liability to the charges." The sheriff's face had gone from red to ash white, of course, so we'll ensure Mr. Carter's comfort and safety. "One more thing," Malcolm added. "Every officer involved in this arrest is now under federal investigation. I suggest you all think very carefully about your next moves. Cooperation might be the only thing between you and a federal prison cell." Briggs set the phone down with unsteady hands. The other officers had backed away from Ethan, creating a respectful distance that bordered on fear. Through the station windows, Ethan could see Officer Lucas practically running to his computer terminal. "Get him out of that cell," Briggs barked, fumbling with his keys. "And somebody find D.A. Vaughn. Now!" The station erupted into controlled chaos. Officers scrambled to their desks, desperately deleting files and shredding papers. Phones started ringing as word spread through Mill Creek's corrupt justice system that the U.S. Attorney General was about to rain hell upon them. Ethan was quickly escorted to an interview room, this one considerably more comfortable than his cell. Coffee appeared before him, along with apologetic offers of food and water. The transformation was almost comical, from hardened criminal to honored guest in the space of one phone call. D.A. Vaughn burst through the door, his usual composure shattered. "Is it true? The U.S. Attorney General?" "My older brother," Ethan confirmed, taking a slow sip of coffee. "He's always been very protective of family." Vaughn slumped into a chair, his face ashen. "This can't be happening. Do you have any idea what we've built here? A racket targeting innocent travelers? A scheme to generate false arrests for federal funding? Or is it something even bigger?" Ethan leaned forward. "Want to tell me about those property seizures I heard mentioned?" Before Vaughn could respond, the station's front doors burst open. FBI agents poured in, their blue windbreakers a stark contrast to the small-town police uniforms. Leading them was Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, her badge gleaming. As she strode directly to where Briggs stood frozen Sheriff Briggs, she announced her voice, carrying across the now silent station, "We have a warrant to seize all departmental records, electronic devices, and evidence related to arrests made in the past 5 years. Briggs found his voice, though it quavered. "This is unprecedented. We have proper procedures. Your procedures are exactly what we're here to investigate." Mitchell cut him off. She turned to her team. "Secure every computer. I want full access to their booking system, evidence logs, and financial records." Officer Barnes made a move toward his desk, but an FBI agent stepped smoothly into his path. "Step away from the computer, officer. That's now federal evidence." The next hour was a symphony of federal efficiency. Agents swept through the station, securing files and equipment. Officers were separated and interviewed in different rooms. The sound of shredders had been replaced by the hum of federal forensics teams copying hard drives. Ethan observed it all from his now comfortable position, noting how quickly the power structure had crumbled. Officer Lucas sat with an FBI agent, talking animatedly, clearly deciding that cooperation was his best option. Other officers huddled in corners, whispering urgently into phones, no doubt calling lawyers. A familiar face appeared in the doorway. The man from the neighboring cell, Bishop, now released and being tended to by paramedics. He caught Ethan's eye and nodded gratefully. Dave Vaughn had been reduced to a nervous wreck, his earlier arrogance replaced by naked fear as he watched federal agents box up years of files from his office. Every now and then he glanced at Ethan with a mixture of hatred and desperation. Sheriff Briggs wasn't faring much better. Special Agent Mitchell had him cornered, methodically taking apart his story. "So you're saying it's just coincidence that your department's drug arrests tripled during the month before federal funding reviews?" "We're just doing our jobs," Briggs protested weakly. "Your job includes fabricating evidence." Mitchell's voice was razor-sharp, "because we've already found some interesting discrepancies in your booking photos' timestamps that don't match video footage evidence logs with inconsistent weights." The sheriff's face went even paler. A younger FBI agent approached Mitchell with a laptop. "Ma'am, you need to see this. We found a hidden folder of spreadsheets tracking their quotas. They've been targeting specific demographics, calculating potential seizure values based on victims' apparent wealth." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Document everything and get cyber forensics in here. I want to know who else had access to these files." Outside, news vans had begun to arrive. their satellite dishes rising like mechanical flowers in the police station parking lot. Local reporters who had long ignored the department's suspicious arrest patterns were now frantically trying to catch. Up to the story, Ethan's phone buzzed. Another text from Malcolm. "How are you holding up?" "Better now," he typed back. "Your timing was perfect. Stay put. I'm landing in 30 minutes. And brother, this is bigger than we thought." Much bigger. As if to confirm Malcolm's words, Mitchell's voice carried across the station. "Sir, we're finding similar patterns in neighboring jurisdictions." This wasn't isolated to Mill Creek. Officer Lucas approached Ethan cautiously, his young face troubled. "Mr. Carter, I should have said something sooner about what they were doing." "It's not too late to do the right thing," Ethan assured him. "Tell the FBI everything you know." Lucas nodded and walked over to where Mitchell was organizing interviews. Another domino falling, another crack in the corrupt foundation. Through the station windows, Ethan could see more FBI vehicles arriving. Agents in cyber forensics gear unloaded equipment, preparing for a deep dive into the department's digital records. The small-town cops who had seemed so powerful just hours ago now looked small and scared. D.A. Vaughn made one last attempt to salvage the situation, approaching Ethan with what he probably thought was a reasonable expression. "Mr. Carter, surely we can work something out. This whole thing is just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Ethan's voice was cold, like the misunderstanding that put Bishop in that cell, or the ones that filled your private prison. "Quotas?" Vaughn's face revealed that Ethan had hit another nerve. Private prisons. Another thread to pull. The DA backed away, nearly bumping into an FBI agent who was boxing up his files. Every drawer open revealed new evidence of corruption. Falsified reports, doctored photographs, spreadsheets tracking quotas and seized assets. A young officer Ethan hadn't seen before rushed in, his face pale. "Sheriff, there's a helicopter landing at the municipal airport. They're saying it's the Attorney General himself. Briggs looked like he might faint. He's coming here? Personally? Did you think he wouldn't?" Mitchell asked with grim satisfaction. "When you arrested his brother on falsified charges." The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, and even through the station's windows, Ethan could see the sleek black aircraft descending. Malcolm had always had a flair for dramatic entrances. Officers who had been trying to maintain their composure finally broke. One began openly crying at his desk. Another started shouting about how he'd been forced to participate. Barnes and Hayes, the original architects of Ethan's arrest, sat in separate rooms with federal agents, each presumably trying to blame the other. The station door opened again, and a hush fell over the room. Malcolm Carter stood in the doorway, his 6'2" frame commanding immediate attention. His tailored suit and stern expression radiated authority, but his eyes softened slightly when they fell on Ethan. "Brother," he said simply, crossing the room in long strides. "Are you all right?" "I am now," Ethan replied, standing to embrace him, "though I think we've stumbled onto something much darker than a simple false arrest." Malcolm's expression hardened as he surveyed the chaos around them. "Agent Mitchell, what have you found?" "Sir, this goes way beyond Mill Creek," she reported. "We're seeing evidence of a coordinated effort across multiple jurisdictions. False arrests, asset seizures, quota systems, and connections to private prison contractors," Ethan added. Vaughn's reaction when I mentioned it was interesting. Malcolm nodded slowly, his mind clearly mapping out the larger implications. "Special Agent Mitchell, I want every electronic device in this building analyzed, every piece of paper documented, every officer interviewed." "Already in progress, sir," she confirmed. "And Sheriff Briggs?" Malcolm turned to where the once proud lawman stood trembling. "I suggest you contact your attorney, though given what we're uncovering you might want to consider being the first to cooperate. It could make a difference in where you serve your time." Briggs slumped in defeat, the last vestiges of his authority crumbling. Through it all, Ethan watched the systematic dismantling of Mill Creek's corrupt power structure. What had started as a routine act of racial profiling had exposed something far more sinister. And as he caught his brother's determined expression, he knew this was just the beginning. The truth about Mill Creek was about to shake the foundations of law enforcement across the country, and it all started with one wrong traffic stop. Evening shadows crept across the Mill Creek police station as federal agents continued their methodical investigation. Ethan sat in what had once been the sheriff's office, watching the controlled chaos through the window. Malcolm had been pulled into an urgent conference call with his DOJ task force, leaving Ethan to observe the department's dismantling. A subtle movement caught his eye. Bishop, the man from the neighboring cell, stood in the doorway. But something had changed. The nervous, defeated posture was gone, replaced by alert professionalism. "Mind if I join you?" Bishop asked, closing the door behind him. He pulled out a federal badge, letting it catch the light. Special Agent Nathan Bishop, DOJ Civil Rights Division. "I've been undercover here for 3 months." Ethan leaned forward, reassessing the man before him. 3 months? Then you know how deep this goes. Deeper than anyone suspected, Bishop confirmed, taking a seat. "Your arrest actually helped us. We needed someone they couldn't intimidate or buy off. Someone with connections they couldn't predict." Through the office blinds, they watched Officer Barnes being escorted to an interview room, his earlier swagger replaced by barely contained panic. "They've been running this scheme for years," Bishop continued, his voice low. "Target successful minorities passing through town, plant evidence, push for plea deals. The ones who fight back get hit with fabricated prior records and pressure from every angle. But it's not just about racial profiling," Ethan observed. "The way they track assets, coordinate with the DA's office. This is about money." Bishop nodded grimly. "Federal funding, asset seizures, private prison kickbacks. Mill Creek is just one piece of a larger network. These small towns form a chain along major travel routes, each one feeding into the same system." A knock at the door interrupted them. Officer Lucas entered, his young face etched with determination. "Agent Bishop, those files you asked about? I found them, hidden in a secure server under the label Budget Forecasts." "Show me," Bishop ordered, standing quickly. Ethan followed them to a computer terminal where Lucas pulled up a series of spreadsheets. The innocuous-looking documents told a chilling story: projected arrest quotas, demographic targets, estimated asset values, and something labeled facility compensation rates. "They actually documented everything," Ethan murmured, scanning. "The data. They were so confident in their power that they kept records." "Arrogance makes for good evidence," Bishop agreed. He turned to Lucas. "How did you get access to these?" The young officer shifted uncomfortably. I was supposed to start managing the quotas next month. Sheriff Briggs said it was my chance to prove my loyalty to the department." A commotion from the main office drew their attention. Special Agent Mitchell was confronting DA Vaughn, who had apparently tried to leave the building. "Going somewhere, Mr. Vaughn?" Mitchell's voice carried clearly, "because these documents suggest you've been coordinating similar operations in at least 3 other counties." Vaughn's usual polish had completely cracked. "I want my lawyer." "I'm not saying another word without representation." "Might want to pick your attorney carefully," Mitchell advised coldly, "because the first ones to cooperate with our investigation will get consideration. The rest." She let the implication hang in the air. Bishop turned back to the computer, pointing out key entries. "See these transfer codes? They match patterns we've seen in other jurisdictions. Small towns feeding into regional holding facilities, then into private prison systems. Each step generates profit, kickbacks, and federal funding." "And Briggs?" Ethan asked. "Where does he fit in?" "Middle management," Bishop explained. "Enforces the quotas, maintains the local operation, takes his cut. But the real power lies higher up. Prison contractors, corrupt judges, politicians." A sudden shadow in the doorway made them turn. Malcolm stood there, his expression grave. Just got off the phone with the DOJ task force. Things are worse than we thought. Tell me, Bishop said, straightening in his chair. We've identified similar patterns in 12 other towns across 3 states, each one with the same setup. Corrupt police force, compromised DA, cooperative judges. It's systematic. Ethan processed this information. How many innocent people? Hundreds. Bishop cut in maybe thousands. Some took plea deals out of fear. Others got railroaded through rigged trials, all feeding bodies into private prisons. Malcolm moved to study the spreadsheets on Peter's screen. Officer, what can you tell me about these facility codes? They're used to track where each prisoner gets sent, Lucas explained, his voice heavy with guilt. Different facilities pay different rates. The higher security ones bring in more money. That's why they fabricate prior records. Ethan realized. More priors means higher security classification, which means more profit. Bishop finished. The whole system is designed to maximize returns. They even have preferred demographics, educated professionals who can work complex jobs in prison industries. A young FBI tech burst into the room, laptop in hand. Agent Bishop, we cracked their encrypted email server. You need to see this. The screen showed years of correspondence between Mill Creek's leadership and various corporate entities. Coded language discussed revenue optimization, demographic targeting, and judicial compliance. Look at this one, Mitchell said, pointing to a particular email. Monthly bonus structure based on conviction rates and asset seizures. They turned justice into a business model. Malcolm's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. DOJ just found offshore accounts linked to Judge Harrison. He's handled over 60% of Mill Creek's drug cases in the past year. All guilty verdicts, Lucas added quietly. He never rules against the department because he's being paid not to, Mitchell concluded. We're finding similar patterns with other judges in the network. Ethan watched the evidence mounting, each revelation more damning than the last. What had started as his wrongful arrest was unraveling a conspiracy that spanned states and corrupted entire justice systems. Through the window, he could see Sheriff Briggs crumbling under interrogation in another room. The man who had smugly denied him his phone call now sat defeated, spilling secrets to save himself. We've got problems. Another agent announced from the doorway. Just intercepted a call from Vaughn to someone named Senator Whitmore. They were discussing containment strategies. Malcolm straightened his tie. Charles Whitmore, head of the Judiciary Committee? The same, the agent confirmed. Vaughn told him, and I quote, Carter's brother is here. The whole operation could be compromised. So it goes higher than judges, Ethan observed. Politicians are involved too. Bishop nodded grimly. Makes sense. You need political protection to run something this big. Friendly committee members to approve judicial appointments, legislators to maintain private prison contracts, and now they're scared. Mitchell added with satisfaction. They should be. This is RICO territory, racketeering, corruption, civil rights violations, the whole network's going down. Officer Lucas spoke up hesitantly. There's more. In the evidence room, there are boxes of case files. Cold cases where suspects resisted, arrested, and ended up dead. I always thought something felt wrong about them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about false arrests and rigged trials anymore. There were potentially murders to investigate. Malcolm turned to his brother. Your arrest might have saved lives, Ethan. They were getting bolder, more confident. If we hadn't caught them now, how many other towns are out there? Ethan wondered aloud. How many other networks like this? We'll find them, Bishop promised. This investigation is just the beginning. Once we flip a few key players, get them talking about the larger operation. A commotion erupted in the main office. Officer Barnes was being led back to holding, but he was shouting, I want immunity. I can give you names, judges, politicians, prison board members. They're starting to turn on each other, Mitchell observed with satisfaction. Fear does that, each one trying to cut a better deal than the last. Malcolm's phone buzzed again. He read the message. a grim smile forming. DOJ just froze the assets of Regional Correctional Services, the private prison company linked to most of these cases. Their stock is already plummeting. Good, Bishop said firmly. Hit them where it hurts, their profits. These people only understand money. Ethan moved to the window, watching the ongoing federal operation below. More agents were arriving, along with what looked like forensic accountants and computer specialists. The small-town police station had become the epicenter of a national investigation. We need to move carefully, Malcolm cautioned. These people have resources, connections. They'll fight back once they realize how much we know. Let them, Mitchell replied. Every move they make, every call they try to cash in, it just gives us more threads to pull, more evidence to collect. Lucas looked up from his computer. Agent Bishop, I found something else. Looks like weekly reports sent to someone called the committee. Details about arrests, assets, conviction rates. Bishop leaned in to study the documents. The committee. We've heard that name before. High-level oversight group. Very careful about electronic traces. This could be our link to the top. The corruption goes all the way up, Ethan mused. From street cops to senators. And now we can prove it, Malcolm stated firmly. Every spreadsheet, every email, every offshore payment. It's all evidence. They documented their own conspiracy. Through the station's windows, they could see news vans beginning to arrive. Local reporters who had ignored suspicious patterns for years were suddenly very interested in Mill Creek's police department. We should get ahead of this, Mitchell suggested. Control the narrative before they start spinning it. Malcolm nodded. I'll make a statement, but keep it focused on Mill Creek for now. We don't want to tip our hand about the larger investigation. Ethan watched a handcuffed Officer Hayes being led to a transport vehicle, head bowed. The man had helped arrest him just hours ago, confident in his power. Now he was headed to federal custody. What happens next? Ethan asked his brother. We build the case, Malcolm replied. Every connection, every payment, every fake arrest. It won't be quick and it won't be easy, but we're going to dismantle this entire corrupt machine. Bishop stood, straightening his jacket. I should get my official statement on record while everything's fresh. 3 months undercover. I've got a lot to tell the investigators. Officer Lucas, Mitchell called. We'll need your testimony too. Detailed accounts of everything you witnessed, every file you can access. The young officer nodded firmly, his earlier uncertainty replaced by determination. I'll tell you everything. It's time someone did the right thing in this department. As the others filed out, Ethan remained by the window, watching the scene below. In just hours, his wrongful arrest had triggered an avalanche that was burying decades of corruption. But he knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, powerful people were making calls, destroying evidence, preparing their defenses. The real fight was still to come. Malcolm joined him at the window. You okay, brother? Better than okay, Ethan replied. For the first time since I was pulled over, I feel like something good might come from all this. Something good, Malcolm agreed, watching another corrupt officer being led away. And something big. By the time we're done, the whole broken system will be exposed. Below them, Agent Mitchell was organizing teams for the next phase of the investigation. The small-town police station had become ground zero for a corruption probe that would shake the foundations of America's justice system. And it all started with one traffic stop on a quiet afternoon in Mill Creek. Night had fallen over Mill Creek Police Station, but inside, the fluorescent lights burned bright as ever. D.A. Richard Vaughn sat alone in his office, surrounded by the ruins of his carefully constructed life. His fingers trembled as he dialed, a number he'd been warned to use only in emergencies. We have a situation, he whispered into the phone. They're not just looking at the arrests anymore. They found the offshore accounts. The voice on the other end was cold, controlled. Handle it. You don't understand. Vaughn hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. The Attorney General himself is here. They're pulling files going back years. My assistant is already talking. To the feds. A pause then. Your assistant knows about the records? Claire handles all the paperwork. She knows everything, then you know what needs to be done. Clean house. Richard quickly the line when dead. Vaughn stared at his phone, understanding the implications. Down the hall, his assistant Claire Matthews was still talking to federal agents, unaware of the order just given. In another part of the station, Sheriff Briggs was reaching his breaking point. Special Agent Mitchell had been questioning him for hours, laying out evidence of years of corruption. "Let's talk about Nathan Wright," Mitchell said, sliding a photograph across the table. Successful black business owner, passing through Mill Creek last year, arrested on drug charges, died in custody, officially ruled a suicide. Briggs's face went ash white. I can't what, Sheriff? Can't explain why the autopsy photos don't match the official report? Can't justify why the security cameras malfunctioned during his death? Or can't live with what you helped cover up? Before Briggs could respond, an urgent knock interrupted them. An FBI agent entered, his expression grim. "We just intercepted a call from the station's landline. Someone contacted a burn phone registered to Sentinel Correctional Solutions. They're mobilizing something called Protocol Zero." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Get me everything we something called Protocol Zero." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Get me everything we have on Protocol Zero and put a protection detail on every potential witness." Meanwhile, Ethan and Malcolm were reviewing evidence with Agent Bishop when Officer Lucas burst in, his young face pale with fear. "You need to see this," he said, hands shaking as he pulled up an encrypted email on his phone. It just came through on the department's secure server. "Someone's ordering a hit on Claire Matthews," Vaughn's assistant. Malcolm moved instantly, grabbing his phone. "Mitchell, we need immediate protection for Claire Matthews. They're trying to silence her." Through the station's windows, they could see Claire leaving the interview room, unaware of the danger. A corrections officer they didn't recognize was following her, one hand concealed beneath his jacket. "Get her," Malcolm shouted. Agent Bishop moved with trained precision, intercepting the corrections officer just as he reached for something in his jacket. The resulting scuffle was brief but violent. When it was over, agents found a loaded syringe in the man's pocket, a lethal dose of something that would have looked like a heart attack. "Who sent you?" Mitchell demanded as they cuffed him. The would-be assassin just smiled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Claire Matthews stood trembling as agents rushed her to safety, the color drained from her face. "They were going to kill me, but I've worked with these people for years." "That's exactly why," Ethan explained gently. "You know too much." In his office, Vaughn was frantically deleting files when agents burst in. They caught him trying to feed documents into a shredder. Documents that detailed payments to judges, kickbacks from private prisons, and something labeled demographic targeting protocols. "It's not what you think," Vaughn stammered as they secured the evidence. "Really?" Mitchell asked, picking up a half-shredded paper. "Because it looks like instructions for your officers on which types of travelers to target, complete with racial profiles and estimated asset values." Down in the holding cells, Sheriff Briggs had finally cracked. "You don't understand," he sobbed to the federal investigators. "When I tried to back out last year, they sent me photos of my family, my grandchildren at their school. They own us all." Agent Bishop was coordinating with other undercover operators across state lines. Reports were coming in of similar cleanup attempts at other corrupt departments, files being destroyed, witnesses threatened, evidence disappearing. "They're burning it all down," he reported grimly, trying to contain the damage. Malcolm's phone buzzed with an urgent text from his DOJ team. Senator Whitmore just called an emergency closed-door session of the Judiciary Committee. "They're trying to shut down our investigation." "Like hell they are," Malcolm growled, already dialing Washington. Ethan watched the chaos unfold, noting how the corrupt system was revealing itself through its desperate attempts at survival. Every cover-up attempt, every threat, every deleted file was just more evidence of how deep the corruption went. Officer Lucas approached, clutching a stack of papers. I found something else. Records of other suicides in custody. All successful minorities. All passing through town. All with substantial assets that were seized. How many? Mitchell asked sharply. 17 in the past 3 years. Just in. Mill Creek. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just corruption anymore. It was murder for profit, sanctioned by the very system meant to prevent it. Suddenly the station's power went out, plunging everything into darkness. Emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie shadows. There, trying to knock out our computers, an FBI tech shouted, "Cyber attack on the station systems." But Malcolm smiled grimly. Too late. We've been copying everything to secure DOJ servers since we arrived. They can't erase what we already have. In the dim light, they could see Vaughn being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his arrogance replaced by naked fear. As he passed Ethan, he whispered, "You have no idea what you've started. They'll never let you expose this." "Who's they?" Ethan demanded. Vaughn just laughed, a hollow sound. "Why do you think small-town cops and local DAs could run something this big? We're just the visible part. The real power. You'll never touch them." Agent Mitchell stepped forward. "Want to bet? Because we just found your offshore accounts, Vaughn. All those wire transfers, all those numbered accounts, they tell quite a story. And guess what? Money leaves trails. Trails that lead right to your bosses." The DA's face went pale. In another room, Claire Matthews was giving her statement, her voice shaking but determined. They had quotas, not just for arrests, but for assets. They called it resource optimization. Each arrest had to yield a minimum value in seized property. If officers didn't meet their quotas, they'd be transferred or worse. And the judges, Mitchell pressed, all appointed through Senator Whitmore committee. They had a system, certain judges for certain cases. Judge Richards handled drug seizures. Judge Sterling took care of any cases that might expose the scheme. It was all coordinated. Outside, more FBI vehicles were arriving. The local news crews had been joined by national networks, their satellite trucks filling the parking lot. The story was getting too big to contain. Malcolm was on the phone with his DOJ team. "I want every judge named in these documents investigated, full financial audits back 20 years, and get me everything you can on Sentinel Correctional Solutions, corporate records, tax returns, board members." Agent Bishop emerged from the evidence room, his face grim. Found another set of books. They were tracking everything. Arrest quotas, asset values, even attrition rates in custody. They treated it like a business. It was a business, Ethan C. corrected. A business built on destroying lives. The station's power suddenly returned, computers rebooting one by one. The FBI tech looked up from his laptop. They tried to wipe the servers, but we caught it, and we traced the attack. It came from a law firm in Washington, same firm that represents Senator Whitmore. Mitchell smiled coldly. Add that to the evidence pile. Their panic is making our case for us. Through the station windows, they could see Sheriff Briggs being led to a transport vehicle. His head bowed. The man who had run Mill Creek, like his personal fiefdom, now looked small, broken. Officer Lucas approached Ethan, his young face troubled. "There's something else you should know. Before all this started, they had a meeting about you. After you were stopped, but before the arrest. They pulled up your background, saw your success, your connections. That's why they pushed so hard, to make the charges stick. You were supposed to be their biggest score yet. Instead, I'll be their last," Ethan replied firmly. Malcolm's phone buzzed again. His expression darkened as he read the message. Senator Whitmore just called an emergency press conference. He's going to try to spin this as a few corrupt local officials contain the damage. "Let him try," Mitchell said. "We have paper trails linking him directly to judicial appointments in every corrupt jurisdiction. And those judges' offshore accounts all trace back to the same shell companies." The night wore on, but the station remained a hive of activity. Federal agents processed evidence, interviewed witnesses, and built their case piece by piece. The corrupt machine was being dismantled, its inner workings exposed to the light. Claire Matthews's voice carried from the interview room. The private prison contracts were just the beginning. They had deals with everything: prison labor programs, commissary services, even medical care. Every aspect of incarceration was monetized. In another room, they could hear Barnes finally breaking down. "I'll tell you everything about the judges, the quotas, the whole system. Just protect my family, please." Ethan stood at the window, watching the news vans multiply. Tomorrow, the story would break. The world would learn about Mill Creek's corrupt machine, about similar operations across the country, about a system that turned justice into a commodity. Malcolm joined him, his tie loosened after hours of work. "You okay, brother?" "I keep thinking about the others," Ethan replied quietly. "The ones who didn't have a U.S. Attorney General for a brother. The ones who took plea deals out of fear. Or worse. We'll find them," Malcolm promised. "Every case, every conviction, we'll make it right." But before Malcolm could say more, Mitchell burst in. "Sir, we have a problem. Someone just sent orders to all the connected departments. They're calling it the nuclear option. Mass document destruction. System wipes everything. They're trying to bury it all," Bishop realized. "Too late," Malcolm said grimly. "We've got enough, and every attempt to cover it up just gives us more evidence of conspiracy." A young agent rushed in. "Sir, Judge Sterling was just caught trying to board a private plane, and you'll never guess who chartered it." "Sentinel Correctional Solutions?" Mitchell asked. "Better. The plane is registered to a subsidiary of the private prison company, same company that's been paying kickbacks to Senator Whitmore." The pieces were falling into place, each revelation leading to another. The corrupt machine was vast, but it was no longer invisible. And as midnight approached, its architects were learning a hard truth. No system, no matter how powerful, could survive exposure to the light. The Oakwood Bar and Grill sat on the outskirts of Mill Creek, its neon sign flickering in the late night. Darkness. Inside, Sheriff Briggs, D.A. Vaughn, and 3 senior officers huddled in a back booth, their voices low and urgent. Empty whiskey glasses littered the table, liquid courage for men watching their world collapse. "The feds are everywhere," Officer Barnes muttered, his usual swagger replaced by barely contained panic. "They're going through everything. Arrest records, evidence logs, financial documents." Vaughn's perfectly pressed suit was wrinkled now, his collar dark with nervous sweat. "We need to coordinate our stories. If we all stick to the same narrative, Briggs cut in, his voice harsh. "They have the files, Richard, all of them. Your precious narrative won't explain away offshore accounts and falsified evidence." The bar's door swung open, letting in a blast of cool night air. Judge Edward Sterling entered, his judicial authority stripped away by fear. He slid into the booth, ordering a double scotch with trembling hands. "My office is being searched as we speak," Sterling announced. "They're pulling records of every case I've handled in the past decade. The DOJ is cross-referencing my rulings with the payment schedules they found in Vaughn's files." Outside, unseen by the corrupt officials, federal surveillance teams documented every entrance and exit. Agent Mitchell's voice crackled over secure channels. "All targets are in position. Strike teams, stand by." Back at the police station, Ethan watched the operation unfold on multiple screens. Malcolm stood beside him, his presence radiating controlled fury as they listened to the corrupt officials through hidden microphones. "They're scared," Ethan observed, finally realizing what they've done. "Good," Malcolm replied. "Fear makes people sloppy, makes them talk." Inside the bar, the conversation grew more desperate. Briggs drained another glass, his face flushed. "We should have killed Carter when we had the chance, made it look like another suicide in custody." Vaughn's head snapped up. "Keep your voice down, and don't talk about the other incidents." "Not here, not ever." "Why not?" Barnes laughed bitterly. The feds already know. They found the hidden case files, all 17 suicides, complete with the EO, actual cause of death reports we buried. In the surveillance van, Agent Mitchell keyed her radio. Did you get that? Full confession to multiple murders. Moving on my mark. The corrupt officials were too focused on their panic to notice the unmarked vehicles surrounding the bar. FBI. Teams took up positions at every exit, while DOJ agents prepared to serve multiple federal warrants. Sterling was still talking, his words slurring slightly. I can't go to prison. Do you know what they do to judges inside, especially judges who send innocent men to their deaths? None of us are going to prison, Vaughn declared, but his voice lacked conviction. I've made some calls. Friends in high places. They'll protect us. Briggs snorted. Like they protected Judge Harrison? He's singing like a bird to the feds right now, trading everything he knows for a lighter sentence. The mention of Harrison sent a fresh wave of panic through the group. The judge had been part of their scheme from the beginning, signing off on illegal searches and rubber-stamping asset seizures. Outside, Malcolm received a text from his DOJ task force. Harrison gave up everything. We have names, dates, account numbers, green light for mass arrests. He nodded to Agent Mitchell. Take them. The bar's door burst open as federal agents poured in from every entrance. The corrupt officials barely had time to register what was happening before they were surrounded by drawn weapons and shouted commands. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. Vaughn tried to run but made it 2 steps before being tackled by an FBI agent. Judge Sterling simply slumped in his seat, all pretense of dignity gone. Briggs reached for something under his jacket, but froze when 3 laser sights appeared on his chest. I wouldn't, Agent Mitchell advised coldly, stepping forward. Richard Vaughn, Walter Briggs, James Barnes, Edward Sterling, you're all under arrest for corruption, conspiracy, racketeering, and multiple counts of murder. As agents began reading rights and applying handcuffs, Malcolm entered with Ethan beside him. The brothers' presence sent a visible shock through the corrupt officials. You, Briggs spat, glaring at Ethan. You destroyed everything. No, Ethan replied calmly. You destroyed everything. Every life you ruined, every innocent person you framed, every murder you covered up. That was all you. I just helped expose it. Mitchell approached with a thick stack of federal indictments. Gentlemen, these warrants outline charges including but not limited to conspiracy to violate civil rights, corrupt organization, evidence tampering, multiple counts of first-degree murder, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Vaughn's legal mind kicked in through his panic. We want deals. All of us. We have information about higher-level involvement. Higher level? Malcolm stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. You mean Senator Whitmore, Sentinel Correctional Solutions, the private prison executives? We already have their files, thanks to your meticulous record-keeping. The color drained from Vaughn's face as Malcolm continued. Your offshore accounts were particularly helpful. Amazing how money can be traced, isn't it? Every payment, every kickback, every bribe, it all leaves a trail. Outside, news vans were already arriving, drawn by the fleet of federal vehicles. Camera crews captured the moment as the corrupt. Officials were let out in handcuffs, their expressions a mixture of defeat and terror. This is just the beginning. Mitchell informed them as they were loaded into transport vehicles. We're rolling up your entire network. Every corrupt cop, every bought judge, every politician on the take. Back inside, FBI teams were documenting. The scene recording the positions of glasses and napkins with hastily scribbled notes, evidence of the officials' desperate last meeting. Malcolm's phone buzzed with updates from other jurisdictions. Similar arrests happening in 12 other towns. Federal teams hitting corrupt departments simultaneously. Ethan watched the operation unfold, thinking about how his simple traffic stop had triggered this avalanche of justice. How many innocent people did they hurt? Too many, Malcolm answered grimly. We'll find them all. Every false conviction, every seized asset, every covered-up death. We'll make it right. At the station, Claire Matthews was still providing evidence to Federa. Investigators. They kept 2 sets of books, she explained, pulling up files on her computer. One for official review, one for their real operation. The second set tracked everything, racial profiles of targets, asset values, even success rates for each officer. Agent Bishop joined them, his undercover work finally complete. We found similar systems in every corrupt department. They turned racial profiling into a business model, complete with quotas and performance metrics. Outside the bar, Vaughn was making one last desperate attempt to save himself. I want to talk about the private prison contracts, about the kickbacks to state officials. Save it for your formal statement, Mitchell advised. And remember, first ones to cooperate get consideration. Last ones get the full weight of federal charges. The night air was filled with the sounds of sirens as more federal vehicles arrived. News helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights illuminating the scene as more corrupt officials were brought in from around the county. Malcolm received another urgent update. Senator Whitmore just tried to board a private jet at Reagan National. FBI teams intercepted him on the runway. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Mitchell, mused. That's going to make headlines. Inside one of the transport vehicles, they could hear Briggs breaking down. They told us we were untouchable, said they had judges and politicians. In their pocket. You were all touchable, Malcolm replied. Every single one of you. And now you're going to face justice. Real justice, not the corrupt system you created. Ethan watched as the last transport vehicle pulled away, carrying the architects of Mill Creek's corrupt machine to federal custody. But something in Vaughn's earlier words nagged at him. He said they turned racial profiling into a business model, Ethan noted. But businesses have owners, investors, people with real power. Malcolm nodded grimly. That's our next target. The private prison executives, the corrupt politicians, the financiers who profited from all the suffering. This isn't over. It's just moving to a bigger stage. FBI teams were still processing the bar, documenting the final meeting of Mill Creek's corrupt leadership. Each napkin with hasty notes, each recorded conversation, each panic-driven confession would become evidence in what was rapidly becoming one of the largest corruption cases in American history. Agent Mitchell approached with a tablet, displaying more arrested officials from other jurisdictions. It's working exactly as we planned. The simultaneous raids caught them all off guard. No time to coordinate stories or destroy evidence. And Senator Whitmore? Malcolm asked. Crying about congressional immunity, Mitchell smiled. But we have his signature on private prison contracts, offshore account transfers, even emails about managing investigations. He's going down with the rest. Through the bar's windows, they could see Officer Lucas talking to federal agents, providing details about the department's operations. The young officer had chosen the right side of history, and his testimony would help ensure justice. Ethan turned to his brother. When does the press conference start? 1 hour, Malcolm replied. Time to tell the world about Mill Creek's machine and all the others like it. Time to shine a light on every dark corner of this corrupt system. As they left the bar, the brothers paused to watch federal teams continuing their work. What had started with one wrongful arrest had exposed a nationwide network of corruption. But as Vaughn's words echoed in Ethan's mind, he knew the real fight was just beginning. The visible part of the machine had been dismantled. Now it was time to take down the power behind it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the Mill Creek Federal Building as Malcolm Carter approached the podium. Camera crews from every major network jostled for position, their satellite trucks filling the parking lot. Behind him stood Ethan, Agent Mitchell, and a row of federal officials, a united front against corruption that had been building for this moment. Last night, Malcolm began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Federal agents executed simultaneous raids across 3 states, arresting over 40 law enforcement officials, judges, and public servants involved in a widespread corruption scheme. This morning, I stand before you to detail the full scope of their crimes. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as Malcolm held up a thick document. This federal indictment outlines a criminal enterprise that turned our justice system into a profit center. They targeted innocent travelers based on race and apparent wealth, falsified evidence and coerced plea deals, all to feed a network of private prisons and generate illegal profits. Inside the building, FBI teams were processing the arrested. Officials, Sheriff Briggs, his uniform now replaced by prison orange, sat slumped in an interview room. Agent Bishop watched through one-way glass as a man who had terrorized Mill Creek finally broke down. The private prison contracts were just the beginning, Briggs confessed, his voice hollow. Sentinel Correctional Solutions. They provided everything. The quotas, the targeting profiles, even templates for falsifying evidence. They called it revenue optimization, but it went deeper than anyone knows. In another room, D.A. Vaughn was making his own deal, his perfectly pressed suit wrinkled from a night in federal custody. Senator Whitmore wasn't just protecting us. He was directing operations, his judicial appointments, the private prison contracts, the offshore accounts. It was all connected through the syndicate. Agent Mitchell entered with a fresh stack of files, her expression grim. We found something interesting in Judge Sterling's records. Monthly reports sent to someone called the syndicate. Performance metrics on conviction rates, asset seizures, prison populations. This was a business operation disguised as law enforcement. The syndicate. Vaughn's face went pale. You don't want to know about them. Trust me. They make people disappear. Not just criminals, but anyone who threatens their operation. Oh, but we do. Mitchell leaned forward, her voice still. And you're going to tell us everything. Starting with the 17 deaths in custody that conveniently got ruled as suicides. Meanwhile, Ethan was reviewing evidence with federal prosecutors when Officer Lucas burst in clutching a laptop. You need to see this. Judge Harrison's files. They show payments going back 15 years, but not just to him. To dozens of judges across multiple states. They were building a network of corrupt courts. The evidence room had become a hub of activity as federal teams processed mountains of seized documents. Each file revealed new layers of corruption, new connections to power players they hadn't even suspected. The wall of evidence grew by the hour, covered with photos and documents linked by red string, a web of corruption that stretched from small-town police stations to the highest levels of government. Malcolm's press conference continued outside, his voice carrying through the building's windows. As of this morning, federal agents have seized over $30 million in illegal assets. We've frozen accounts connected to corrupt officials, private prison contractors, and their political enablers. But this is just the beginning. A reporter raised her hand, her voice cutting through the murmur. Mr. Attorney General, sources say Senator Whitmore was arrested trying to flee the country. Can you confirm his involvement in this conspiracy? Senator Whitmore is in federal custody, Malcolm confirmed, his expression grave. And the evidence suggests his role went far beyond simple corruption. He appears to have been a key architect of this criminal enterprise, using his position on the Judiciary Committee to approve corrupt judges and protect the operation. Back inside, Agent Mitchell was interrogating Judge Sterling, whose aristocratic composure had crumbled under the weight of evidence against him. Tell me about the syndicate, she demanded, spreading photographs across the table. Who sits on it? Who controls the operation? Sterling's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. They're untouchable. Corporate executives, prison industry leaders, people with real power. We were just their tools, their public face. When someone threatened the operation, the syndicate handled it. No one's untouchable, Mitchell replied, sliding another document forward. Just ask your friend Senator Whitmore. He's already talking about offshore accounts and shell companies, about murder disguised as suicide, about judges paid to convict innocent people. On the other side of the building, Claire Matthews was working with FBI's cyber teams, decoding years of encrypted communications. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed hidden files and secret correspondence. Look at these email chains. She pointed to her screen, highlighting key passages. They're not just talking about Mill Creek. They're coordinating similar operations in dozens of jurisdictions. They call it demographic resource management, a fancy term for systematic racial profiling for profit. How far does this go? Ethan asked, studying the complex web of data scrolling past. We're finding connections to private prison boards, security contractors, even international investment groups, a cyber analyst replied, pulling up new documents. They turn racial profiling into a billion-dollar industry. Every false arrest, every seized asset, every prison sentence fed into their profit machine. Malcolm's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression darkened as he read it. The CEO of Sentinel Correctional Solutions just called an emergency board meeting. Behind, closed doors at their corporate headquarters. Not closed enough, Mitchell smiled, holding up a warrant fresh from a federal judge. We have probable cause for wiretaps and surveillance. Every word they say will be evidence. In Washington, Senator Whitmore sat in a federal holding cell, his power and privilege stripped away. Through his lawyer, he had already begun negotiating, desperate to save himself from what he'd helped create. My client is prepared to provide comprehensive information about the syndicate's operations, names, dates, financial records, everything. The news of Whitmore cooperation sent shockwaves through the corrupt network. In boardrooms and private offices across the country, powerful people began to panic. Phones rang with urgent calls. Documents were shredded. Flight plans were filed. A mysterious figure watched the coverage from a dimly lit office in Washington's most exclusive district. The man's expensive suit and commanding presence marked him as someone used to wielding power from the shadows. His private line rang, a number known to only a select few. This is becoming a problem. The voice on the other end stated flatly, Carter is digging too deep. If he connects us to the syndicate, to Operation Iron Gate, it's contained, the man replied, but his tone lacked conviction. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the office's perfect climate control. Is it? The attorney. General isn't just following the money. He's dismantling our entire operation. And his brother's case gives him the perfect cover. Racial justice. Civil rights. The press is eating it up. The public is demanding answers. Back in Mill Creek, civil rights. The press is eating it up. The public is demanding answers. Back in Mill Creek, Ethan was reviewing seized documents when something caught his eye. These aren't just arrest quotas, he realized, spreading the papers across the table. They're demographic projections. They were planning future targeting operations, expanding to new jurisdictions. This was going to go nationwide. Agent Bishop nodded grimly, pointing to specific entries. We found similar documents in other departments. They were building an empire based on false arrests and asset seizures. Each department fed prisoners into the private prison system. Each judge got their cut. Each politician protected the operation. Perfect machine. The federal building buzzed with activity as more evidence poured in. FBI teams had raided Sentinel Correctional Solutions' offices, seizing computers and files. Each new document revealed more connections, more powerful players involved in the conspiracy. Malcolm joined them, his expression grave. Just got word from DOJ. They found a pattern in judicial appointments across multiple states. Every judge we've identified was approved by the same Senate committee. Whitmore committee, Mitchell confirmed, adding another photo to the evidence wall. But Whitmore wasn't working alone. Malcolm continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. The pattern goes back 20 years, spanning multiple committee chairs. This was systematic. They were installing corrupt judges to protect their operation. Outside, protesters had begun to gather, their signs demanding justice for victims of the corrupt system. Families of those wrongly convicted for victims of the corrupt system. Families of those wrongly convicted held photos of their loved ones. The human cost of the conspiracy was becoming impossible to ignore. In the evidence room, Claire Matthews made another discovery that made her gasp. These financial records show regular payments to a company called Strategic Corrections Partners, but when I looked them up, they don't exist. It's another shell company laundering millions in illegal profits. Follow the money, Mitchell ordered, dispatching more agents. Every transfer, every account. I want to know where these payments really went. Who owns the shell companies? Who controls the accounts? Ethan watched the investigation unfold, thinking about how his wrongful arrest had started this avalanche. But something still nagged at him. They're scared, he observed, watching the panic spread through the corrupt network. Not just the local officials, but the people at the top. Why? What are we getting close to? Because we're close to something bigger, Malcolm replied, reviewing new evidence. The syndicate isn't just about private prisons. This is about power. About controlling who goes to prison and who profits from it, about turning justice itself into a commodity. Agent Bishop entered with new information, his face flushed with excitement. You need to see this. We found recordings of board meetings. They're not just talking about current operations. They're planning expansion, new jurisdictions, new targeting protocols. They're not done, Ethan realized, scanning the documents. Even with all these arrests, they're planning to continue, to expand. Not if we can help it, Malcolm stated firmly. Every piece of evidence, every cooperating witness brings us closer to the top, and once we expose the syndicate, his phone buzzed again. The message made him pause, his expression shifting from determination to shock. Senator Whitmore wants to talk. Says he has information about something called Operation Iron Gate. Mitchell's eyes widened. Operation Iron Gate. That's mentioned in some of the encrypted files we found, but we couldn't crack the details. Whatever it is, they went to extreme lengths to hide it. Then, let's go hear what the senator has to say, Malcolm decided, already moving toward the doors they prepared to leave. Ethan noticed a pattern in the financial documents, these shell companies. They all trace back to the same law firm in Washington, the same firm that tried to cyber-attack our investigation. No coincidence, Mitchell noted, adding another string to the evidence wall. They're getting sloppy, making mistakes. Fear does that. Malcolm's expression hardened as pieces fell into place. No coincidence at all. The law firm, the shell companies, the syndicate. It's all connected, and we're getting close. Outside, the press conference had evolved into breaking news coverage as more arrests were announced. Each hour brought new revelations, new connections to powerful figures. But in that Washington office, the mysterious man made another call, his voice carrying deadly calm. Implement Contingency Plan Delta. The syndicate is moving to secure mode. And, the Carter brothers? The voice asked. Handle it, whatever it takes. This ends now. The pieces were falling into place, but the game was far from over. As Ethan and Malcolm prepared to head to Washington to interview Senator Whitmore, both brothers knew they were moving into even more dangerous territory. The visible part of the corruption had been exposed. Now they were hunting bigger prey, the unseen powers that had built and profited from the system of injustice, and those powers were preparing to fight back. 2 weeks after his wrongful arrest in Mill Creek, Ethan Carter stood at his office window in Atlanta, watching the city buzz with morning activity. The familiar skyline looked different now. Everything looked different after what he'd witnessed. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on his shoulders, a constant reminder of the battle they were still fighting. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking: Senator Whitmore pleads guilty in nationwide corruption case. The headline was accompanied by a photo of the once powerful Judiciary Committee chairman being led into federal court, his expensive suit replaced by prison orange, his arrogant demeanor shattered by the reality of his circumstances. Malcolm's message followed moments later. Turn on GNN. You'll want to see this. We're about to shake the foundations. Ethan flipped on the wall-mounted screen, just in time to catch the breaking news. The anchor's voice was grave in a shocking development. 12 federal judges have been indicted following revelations of systematic corruption in the criminal justice system. The investigation, which began with a wrongful arrest in Mill Creek, has exposed what prosecutors are calling an unprecedented network of corruption spanning multiple states and jurisdictions. The scene cut to Malcolm standing at a DOJ podium in Washington, his presence commanding attention. Today's indictments represent the largest judicial corruption case in American history. DOJ podium in Washington, his presence commanding attention. Today's indictments represent the largest judicial corruption case in American history. These judges didn't just accept bribes. They actively participated in a system designed to profit from racial profiling and false imprisonment. The depth of this conspiracy has shocked even our most seasoned investigators. Nathan Bishop, no longer undercover, entered Ethan's office without knocking. The former cellmate, who had turned out to be a federal agent, now headed a DOJ task force investigating similar corruption schemes nationwide. His expression was grim, but determined. "Thought you want to see this firsthand," Bishop said, placing a thick file on Ethan's desk. Complete list of Mill Creek's victims. We're starting the process of overturning their convictions. Each case reveals more corruption, more lives destroyed for profit. Ethan opened the file, his heart heavy as he scanned the names. Hundreds of lives disrupted, families torn apart, futures stolen, all to feed a machine built on prejudice and profit. Each page told a story of injustice, of systematic targeting and false imprisonment. "How many have we freed so far?" he asked, his voice tight with emotion. 57 as of this morning," Bishop replied, taking a seat. "Each case we review reveals more corruption. Judge Harrison's files alone led us to over 30 wrongful convictions. But that's just the beginning. We're finding similar patterns in other jurisdictions." The TV continued its coverage, cutting to a reporter standing outside Regional Resource Management's headquarters. Federal agents raided the private prison contractors' offices early this morning. Sources say executives are cooperating with investigators, providing evidence about what they call the syndicate, a shadowy group of power brokers who allegedly orchestrated the entire scheme. Special Agent Mitchell appeared in the doorway, her presence a reminder of how far they'd come since that night in Mill Creek. "We found their projection models," she announced, dropping another file on Ethan's desk. They were planning to replicate the system in 50 more jurisdictions. Conservative estimate of potential victims? Over 10,000 per year. The implications were staggering. The machine they'd uncovered wasn't just about Mill Creek or even one state. It was a blueprint for nationwide corruption, a system designed to turn justice into a commodity, Malcolm called, his voice carrying the weight of new discoveries. "Whitmore gave us everything, brother. Names, dates, offshore accounts, the whole operation, and it goes higher than we imagined. Cabinet-level officials, corporate executives, even foreign investors. They called it demographic resource management, a fancy term for targeted imprisonment for profit." Through his window, Ethan could see news vans gathering outside his office building. His story, the wrongful arrest that exposed everything, had become a symbol of the larger fight for justice. But with that spotlight came risk. "Operation Iron Gate," Mitchell said, spreading documents across Ethan's desk. That's what they called their expansion plan. Mill Creek was just a prototype. They were building a network of private detention centers, complete with their own corrupt judges and law enforcement. The scope of it's beyond anything we've seen before. The TV showed footage of Mill Creek Police Station, now under federal oversight. Officer Lucas had been promoted to interim chief, tasked with rebuilding the department from the ground up. The young officer who had chosen to stand against corruption was becoming a symbol of reform. In related news, the anchor continued. The Senate Judiciary Committee has announced comprehensive hearings on private prison contracts and judicial appointments. Sources say the investigation has revealed systematic corruption in the appointment process going back over 2 decades. Claire Matthews appeared on screen testifying before a Senate committee. The former assistant who had helped expose the corruption spoke with quiet determination. They had quotas. She explained to the senators, not just for arrests, but for assets. Each arrest had to yield a minimum value in seized property. They turned justice into a business model. Ethan's phone buzzed with another alert, a message from an encrypted number. The syndicate sends its regards. This isn't over. Every empire needs its examples. Bishop noticed his expression. They're getting desperate. The whole network is unraveling. Judge Sterling tried to flee to ISIL, the Cayman Islands, this morning. FBI intercepted him at the airport, found him with a thumb drive full of offshore account numbers. The TV showed new footage, federal agents leading executives from Sentinel Correctional Solutions' headquarters in handcuffs. The company's CEO, Walter Sterling, Judge Sterling's brother, had apparently tried to destroy evidence when he learned of the raid. 6 other private prison companies under investigation now, Mitchell added. Their stocks are in free fall. The whole industry is facing congressional scrutiny. But the real story is where the money goes. We've traced payments through shell companies in Dubai, Singapore, the Caymans. Malcolm's voice came through on speaker. The International Task Force just moved on the finance side. Raids happening in 3 countries. Banking records, corporate documents, everything they tried to hide offshore. We're getting it all. A new face appeared on the TV screen. Senator Charles Whitmore, looking haggard in his prison jumpsuit. I am here today to confess my role in what can only be described as a criminal enterprise operating within our justice system. For years, we used my position on the Judiciary Committee to appoint corrupt judges, approve private prison contracts, and protect a network of corruption that spanned the nation. Ethan watched the confession with mixed emotions. Whitmore had been one of the architects of the system that had nearly destroyed his life. Now he was just another domino falling, revealing more corruption with each new statement. We're getting calls from other jurisdictions. Bishop reported. Officers wanting to come clean, judges ready to cooperate. The whole corrupt machine is starting to crumble, but what? The syndicate isn't finished. They're moving assets, destroying records, eliminating loose ends. 3 potential witnesses have already disappeared. They're fighting back. As if to emphasize his point, Ethan's computer screen suddenly went dark. Then his phone. Then the office lights. Cyber attack, Mitchell said grimly, already on her secure line. They're trying to knock out our systems, corrupt the evidence. But we're ready for them. Everything's backed up on secure DOJ servers. The lights flickered back on, but the message was clear. The syndicate wasn't going down without a fight. Through his window, Ethan could see more media arriving. Protesters gathered with signs demanding justice reform. His case had sparked a national conversation about corruption, race, and power. But that conversation came with risks. A young man entered his office, another victim of Mill Creek's corrupt system. Mr. Carter, I spent 8 months in prison before my family could prove the drugs were planted. Your case, you exposed what they did to all of us. Ethan gestured for him to sit. This was why they couldn't stop, couldn't back down. Too many lives had been destroyed, too many families shattered. The syndicate's threats meant nothing compared to the human cost of their corruption. Malcolm appeared in the doorway, having flown in from Washington. The brothers shared a look of determination. Ready for Phase 2? Malcolm asked. Phase 2? We've exposed the corrupt officials, the judges, the local operators. Now we go after the real power, the corporate boards, the international financiers, the politicians who protected them, the ones who built this machine and profited from it. Mitchell's phone buzzed with new intelligence. Board members are moving money out of the country. Private jets filing flight plans they're running. Let them run, Malcolm said firmly. We've got international warrants ready. Every airport, every border crossing, they've got nowhere to hide. The TV showed more breaking news. International investigation launched into private prison investment network. The corruption had gone global, and so had to fight against it. In Washington, in a dimly lit office, a man in an expensive suit watched his empire crumble. He picked up his phone. Implement the contingency plan. All of them. Make examples. But back in Atlanta, Ethan wasn't afraid. Let them come. Every threat, every attempt at intimidation just proved why this fight mattered. His wrongful arrest had started this. But the story was bigger now. It was about systemic corruption, about justice for sale, about power used to destroy lives for profit, sir. His assistant appeared. There's a call from Geneva. Something about banking records and the syndicate's international operations. Malcolm smiled grimly. They thought they could hide behind offshore accounts and shell companies. But money leaves trails, and we're following everyone. The whole corrupt machine is coming. Down. Outside. The protesters' chants grew louder. Inside, federal agents continued building their case. And somewhere between those two forces, justice was finally being served. The syndicate had built their machine on racism and greed, turning prejudice into profit. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd arrested the wrong man on the wrong night. Now their empire was falling piece by corrupt piece. To be continued. Flashed across the screen as another breaking news alert began. But this wasn't just a story anymore. It was a revolution in justice sparked by one traffic stop on a quiet road in Mill Creek, and it was far from over. But before you go, tell us in the comments, how many innocent lives does it take to build an empire of corruption? In Mill Creek, they had it down to a science, until one wrongful arrest reminded them that justice has a way of finding its own path home, sometimes through a simple phone call that brings down an entire system. If you want to discover more stories that expose the dark corners of American justice, like and subscribe, because some stories don't end when the gavel falls. They're just beginning.